Right. Hi. Kate Floss. I wanted to make this video today. There's been quite a story about who is this Kupe. And I'm telling you something, guys, or Maori peons, I'm hot on the trail of this Kupe and what's going on with the whole Kupe thing. And I'm suspecting, I haven't got to the bottom of it yet, but I'm suspecting that the whole thing is a huge land grab scam. Now, I do know now, don't go quoting me, but I think that the Kupe story is definitely pushed by a group called Kohuria Arau with Edward Moses and some other people. We never know with these people if they are victims of the scams themselves. You know, just because people, we have to be extremely careful here, because just because someone is involved or even having meetings about these groups, it doesn't mean that they were the people that were key to the setting up of the group. Some of them are just victims themselves. Some of them are getting paid a certain amount of money to do these groups, and they want to earn some money, and why wouldn't you? And if people tell you to push a certain narrative, then you're going to do it. So I'm not going to go about accusing people and saying this person or that person, but I do know that there are certain groups around New Zealand that are pushing this narrative that Kupe was a Pacific Islander that discovered New Zealand, both islands, before James Cook, and they're claiming right of discovery. And I'm saying that this is a very dangerous thing for New Zealand, and I'm saying that it just isn't true. And so I did happen to stumble across some information today. And so I want to let everybody know, because I want to get it up here on video before I lose it all. And then once it's up here on video, you can all go and research for yourself. You can't expect me to do everything. I'm not the white slave researcher here, as someone was laughing at me saying that, but I'm not your white slave researcher, but I'm just kind of trying to help out to get the truth out there so that we can all get together and stop being deceived by these evil people and these evil religions that are determined to take over the country of New Zealand. And of course, there is always a white man involved with it, but usually they're from America or France. Some of them are from England too. And there's always some shady Maori characters involved with it all as well, because usually the natives, they are very family orientated, and they all hang out together. And usually the ones that are not too clever are controlled and led by the clever ones that are of the chiefly variety. And it's the clever ones of the chiefly variety that are manoeuvring all of these other people. And the people that are being manoeuvred are shoved up front, and the chiefly variety that are doing the manoeuvring are behind the scenes. And this is also the case with the Anglo people. So we all can't afford to trust anyone, lawyers, trusts, governments, police, chiefs, whatever. We've all got to be involved in controlling our own destiny and controlling our own information. Trust nothing. Don't even trust me. Now, I do get a lot of my stuff from the government websites, but even when I see them, and I am the Google queen, I do not deny I'm the Google queen. You can Google. The only difference between me and the average person is I click on something and it makes me curious about something else. And that makes me curious about something else. And I go down the line and I get the information of all of the pieces. And then I join them all together and I bring it to you in a video. It takes me hours upon hours upon hours. I get no thanks for it. And but I'm not infallible. I'm only just one person trying to fight the government, trying to sort through the web of lies that has been spun for the last 60 years. It is a huge task that we're undertaking. We've got a few people on board searching with me now. I won't mention names because they get into trouble if they help me. There've been threats made. There's been a lot of threats. So today we're on Kupe. Let's get started. So where did I start? I'm going to try and kind of show you how I go about doing my things. So where I got started is yesterday or the day before, I had done a video about Tonighty. And then I was wondering, why can't I find any pictures of this Tonighty? And why I've noticed that all of the chiefs that I see are all of the ones that were fighting with the missionaries. And I'm thinking, well, where are all the chiefs that were fighting against the missionaries? And there didn't seem to be any pictures. And Tonighty was a key chiefly figure, a relative of Te Raupara, and there don't seem to be any pictures. So I thought to myself, okay, I'll Google William Wakefield and I'll find Tonighty, as you can see here. I thought I'll Google them and then I'm going to find a picture of Tonighty, but I actually didn't. I found a picture of William Wakefield. And it led me to another story. I don't know where it is now because I've lost what it was that interested me. So I can't actually tell you what interested me, but that's where I started. And then that led me to, I was very surprised that I saw over here, right, I'll put you over there. Right, I saw this piece here, and the word caught my eye. It said, Te waka tonga mo ngā waka a kupe. And that caught my eye because we're all searching for who is this Kupe. And there are several claims. My claim is that the word Kupe turned up in the late 1800s by Percy Smith, and it was in his fantasy stories about New Zealand where he had mixed islander vocabulary. And the first time that this word Kupe has ever turned up has been then. Now, they called it and then I was very surprised that there was actually a court judgment. I thought, oh, wow, there must be a Kupe, because it's got here the judgment on ngā waka a Kupe block. So that led me to this here. Don't ask me how I got to here. I feel that the spirits are with me and they're leading me, and they lead me in these directions. And then once I've been led there, I'm in kind of a trance. I don't know how I've gotten there. I don't know where I've come up with all this stuff. But there do seem to be people leading me in the moment when I'm in this space. Whoever the people that are dead, in my opinion, call it sorcery if you want, whoever the people are dead, and when I get them into my head, something just comes into my head that I've got to go and do this, and I get to starting to do it, all this information just comes up and it all becomes clear and I have no control over what's going on. So anyway, it led me to here. And what you'll see is quite a difference here, and this is significant. You'll see it's got here ngā waka o Kupe. And this O here, some of you Maori out there, I'm asking you for your information. The O here is significant. And the A here in the waka a Kupe, the A is used also in Maori language. And I know that the waka and the O and the Kupe, I'm wondering what is the meaning of it. And I'm thinking that the O means a place. And when I got to this Kupe, what it says is, it does come up with this, the great Maori explorer, but this is a recent article, and we don't trust anything after, I don't trust anything after 1850 unless it's even court documents. But any of these just writing, I don't trust them, because they're changed and altered by these people that are seeking to take over our country. So they said that he's the explorer known as Kupe, and the important figure in many Maori tribes. And many places, this is what they're trying to say to you, that there are places that are named after him in numerous parts of New Zealand. Now, you've got to be careful about the way that they twist languages, and they share features of the landscape which bear his name. Well, here's in my conspiracy theory, it's saying, I'm saying that they've got the great Maori explorer, and I'm saying that the word Kupe is not the name of the Maori explorer, that the Maori explorer is just nameless people, that there were many of them, and they were nameless people. And so they gave them the name Kupe. And what does Kupe mean, in my opinion? Kupe, in my opinion, means cape, C-A-P-E, cape. And I'm thinking that Kupe is the French for the word cape. And the very old maps, and you remember that the French were there first, and if there are any French people out there, the word cape would have translated into the word Kupe. And I'm saying that Kupe is at the great explorer known as Kupe, meaning the explorers that arrived on the different capes of New Zealand. And so they named him Kupe in my conspiracy theory. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of this. I then went to look at the definition of cape. And what I found is that the definition of cape is a high point of land, you can see the picture, that narrowly extends into a body of water. And I'm thinking that if I really got to and did my research, that all of the places that are apparently discovered by Kupe are in fact in Cape areas. And so that is an interesting thing that we can have a look at in New Zealand. If anybody wants to help on me, I would love you to go and research how many areas of New Zealand are purported to have been discovered by Kupe. And I'm saying that Kupe was simply the word for cape, and it was various different Maori explorers that discovered that place, and it was called a Kupe. And so the explorer got the name Kupe because he discovered those capes. Now, here's another example that we know. Percy Smith wrote his fantasy story, and in his fantasy story, he told a fake story about this two. Sometimes they say that the father and the daughter, and the husband and the wife, and now it's changed to be two brothers because one Kupe wasn't enough, because one Kupe could never have done all of the amazing feats that they reckoned that he could do. So the story is morphed now into two Kupe brothers. One of them was called Kupe and one of them was called something else, apparently. Don't even go into the story. But Kupe, the Percy Smith has already been discredited by several scholars as writing a fantasy story of which many New Zealand people, for very, very suspicious reasons, are claiming it to be true when it isn't. But here's how he described it. It is notable for example, there is a block of land actually called Ngā Waka a Kupe, which just means the canoe cape. Or if you flipped it, because you flip it, it would be called Cape Canoe, which just would have meant that canoes would have floated around in that bay. And it was simply called Cape Canoe. That's all. And so this piece of land was called Cape Canoe, which is marked on various government maps. Well, why would it be of the Wairarapa dating from at least as early as 1893? That, as I said, this word only turned up post 1855. It was never heard of before. And so if there were many, many landmarks that were called Cape Canoe, I'm disputing that Kupe could have rode his freaking waka all around the entire land of New Zealand. I mean, they're not. I mean, be realistic. So these places were called Canoe Cape because obviously this would have been where all the New Zealand maoris would have had their canoes, where they would have gone out to do their fishing. I mean, make some sense, people. This is one block, which is east of the Oyster Shell and north of Hikawera, and it cannot be seen from Martinborough. Now, if you go and look at there, it is actually a canoe, a cove. And you can imagine that the New Zealand Maori would have called all of these places canoe capes. Why? Because that's where they would have been telling each other where you go to do your fishing. So they were all called canoe capes, dingleberries. The feature on the skyline, I better hurry up because it's going to be long. The feature on the skyline that we all know as Ngā Waka o Kupe, southeast of Martinborough, is not part of this block of land. The canoes on the skyline is a bold landscape feature, and it can be seen from many locations in the South Wairarapa area. And here's where it says, it is now, Percy Smith, I think, wrote his book in the 1850s. 1855, I think it was. I've got the books, but I'm not showing them yet because I've got a story on that. But it is notable that in 1907, Percy Smith referred to Ngā Waka o Kupe and as being, and this is what he called it, a range of hills east of Greytown. Smith, 1907, page 156. This might arguably relate to the land block described on the 19th century maps. Moreover, as one drives along the scenic Ponatahi route from Martinborough to Masterton, one is struck by the fact that there are actually quite a few features along the eastern skyline that are strikingly similar to the better-known canoes. Well, they're saying canoes of Kupe, southeast of Martinborough, but I'm saying the canoes of the Cape, and all of these capes were called simply Cape Canoe. They changed it to be the canoe skyline. And so that's all I'm going to say about that, on my opinion of what this Kupe means. And I have said it quite often that Kupe is French for Cape. And then reading this, it also refers to the canoes, the words canoes together with the word cape. Or they say that what they've done is a mixture of words here. They've put waka with the word canoes, and then they've changed cape to the word coupe from the French word of cape, and they would have been called canoe capes. There's some stuff there. You can go and read that if you want to. I'll turn this, but shall I turn it off or shall I keep it in case I need it? So anyway, that got me to searching. And once again, I don't know how I came up with this, but I was very interested in this judgment of the Ngā Waka a Kupe block. And at this point, it wasn't at this point. Well, it was still called the Kupe block, but in these writings, these legal writings, Kupe refers to a block of land, and at this point is not really referring to Kupe as a person, but simply as a block of land which was on a cape of New Zealand. And the Kupe stories and the brandishment of it came about in the 1990s, and you'll see why soon. So anyway, I got interested in this, and that led me to a story about, a story about the Maori land court. And this story here is a story that is in Te Waka Tanga Mo Ngā Waka Kupe Mi Ira Atu Paraka. Now, I can't read this, but it's a whole book, and it is all in Maori that came from this man here, Alexander Mackey. And I assume that it comes from his book, which he's 1891, by the way. So we do have to be a little bit careful about his story too, because the attempt to take over New Zealand lands through the story of Kupe began in the Polynesian Society by the missionaries in around 1855. So anything after that, and from Percy Smith, we have to be extremely cautious. But anyway, this story here was all written in Maori, and it was the Native Land Court, and it led me to, don't even ask me how, but it led me to this man here, who was called they called him Rangi Kirihoma. Now, Rangi Kirihoma, to keep going back here, this is the only picture, and there's one other, I'll show you in a minute. But Rangi Kirihoma was born in, at the time of 1890, when this court document was created. Rangi Kirihoma was 2 years old, and this court document talks about many blocks of land. I can't read it, but I've kind of gone through it and guessed my way a bit, but it seems to be talking about many blocks of land. And at this time, Rangi was 2 years old, and I'm assuming that this is the court case to settle the estate, which was willed to Rangi Kirihoma, and it was all put into a trust for him. And that's what we're going to be looking about, how all this battle of Kupe began. And his block all was the Mo Ngā Waka Kupe block, which meant a cape canoe, a block of land that's in a cape where a lot of canoes and a lot of fishing and all of that went on. And so, right, let's just keep going. So that kind of led me to a court case. And before we go to the court case, part of the court case led me to the, I don't know if you can see this here, but all you've got to Google is the Native Land Amendment Act. Look, I'll show you how to do it. You just go here, Native Land Amendment Act 1912, and then you'll see right here the Native Land Amendment Act, and then you can click onto there. And then you'll see here. Now, the piece that you can read it if you want, but I haven't actually read it. But the piece that I'm interested in was Rangi's court document referred to section 17. And so I went to section 17 and a moment, section 17. Oh, I'm down to 24. Oh, why am I on the wrong one? Well, that's a subsection. Right, there's 16. This is a subsection 17, so don't go. These are all subsection. Ah, right. Now I know where I am. So here is section 17. And here's something interesting for you. And this is just saying to you, you know, everyone keeps saying that the Pākehā stole the land, the Pākehā stole the land. But no, they didn't. They took all the land from the missionaries and they got all the natives to come back to the courts and claim their lands. And then it was all, each New Zealand native who owned lands or had interest in lands was given a protector to take care of them. You can't forbid people from selling land. So each one got a protector. But here's what happened. As time went on, they became more educated. And it says here, the governor may, by order in council on the recommendation of the court, declare any native to be a European. So what they could do is that they could go to the land court and declare themselves a European. This was an irreversible act. And why would somebody give up their Maoridom to be classed as a European? It was because as natives, they were considered not to be able to understand land deeds and land transactions, and they were cheated out of their lands, and this caused them to get upset and angry and to kill people in order to take lands back that Anglo people had bought in good faith. The Anglo people that bought the lands were not at fault here either. They bought the lands in good faith according to how they understood land purchase. The New Zealand natives really didn't comprehend land purchase, and they believed that the Anglo people were just coming to live on the land, and then after a while they would move away, and that the natives believed that they could live there together with them. And this is what caused them to sell the land, because they wanted to be with people. They were very social, and so they thought, oh yeah, I really like this person, he's a great friend of mine, I'm going to give him this piece of land and he's going to give me some money and we're all going to live here happily together. And when these native Anglo people got on there, they said, no, I've bought it and you've got to get out now. The natives didn't understand it. They didn't comprehend it. And so then the natives would go and kill them, of course. So that's all what was happening. Nobody's really at fault here. Everybody had the best of his intentions. So we mustn't go around accusing my lovely Anglo ancestors, by the way. Just a minute, I put on there because I'm hot. Very hot over here. So anyway, it's going to be a long video, isn't it? You can all watch it. I just have to watch it. All right. So anyway, the criteria to declare yourself a native, I'll let the Queen show there. The criteria to declare yourself as a native was that you had to be acquainted, you had to be very well spoken in the English language. And why did you have to be well spoken in the English language? Because all of these transactions were done in English. And so therefore, the English people couldn't speak the native Maori language. And so the transaction would have been illegal if it was done in Maori. And then the native Maori had to be able to understand the language to understand the transaction that he was entering into, or comprehend. Let's try and use that word, comprehend, to comprehend. And so that was part of the criteria. The second criteria, and now this is important, he has at the time of the application sufficient native freehold land, either as a tenant in fee simple or as a tenant for life. Now, let's just comprehend what this was. The fee simple was that the land went through the land court, the native unextinguished title was vested with the Crown. The Crown would give back, and then that can never be taken from that family. And then the Crown would issue back a paper title in the fee simple. And then that person was allowed to buy and sell land in the fee simple, but the native unextinguished title remained with them forever and their descendants. There was another one which was the tenant for life. A tenant for life, they're born to it, and I don't really completely understand this, so please don't quote me. But I think one of my friends was telling me that in regards to native land, they're allowed to have a plot of land there to live on for all of their life, and they don't pay anything for it. But when they die, that piece of land becomes vacant, and their heirs and successors are also entitled to go and apply for a piece of land, but they might not get the same piece. So it doesn't keep going. But so they had to hold a large block of land. Any other land was called European land, but of all European land was in the fee simple paper title. Or it could be under a lease for the period, here's that 21 years. It could be under a lease for a period of which is not less than 21 years. So there's several types of land in New Zealand. One of them could be the paper title. One of them could be that they actually own the unextinguished title that can never ever be sold but can be leased for periods of up to 21 years. Or the other one where they have the tenant for life. So there's several different kinds. It has to be of the opinion of the court that he is able to earn an adequate maintenance by reason of some profession, so he has to have some money or calling, and that he has other income which in the opinion of the court is sufficient for his adequate maintenance. Now, what this was for was that they would not allow New Zealand natives to sell their land if it was going to leave them penniless. Because they were of the opinion that at least if they had their piece of land, at least they had a place that they could live and they wouldn't end up on the streets with no job and penniless. At least they would have their land. So it was illegal for even them themselves to lease or sell land of which they didn't, if they had no other income or no other means of getting money, because they could always get money from the lease of the land. So these were the criteria that you needed to be met to be called a European. On making of any such order in council, the native so declared to be a European shall to all intents and purposes, except as he hereinafter be deemed no longer to be a native or a Maori within the meaning of the Principal Act or any other act, which I have to go and research that. What I'm assuming here now is that I have misunderstood, miscomprehended the word European. I'm starting to think that the word European was given to people that were allowed to buy land in the fee simple. And that's what it means, and it's not anything to do with the colour of the skin. And I'm thinking that the people of Europe were the first people where they set up this thing for the king, where the king would hold all of the pure title, and the people, which would be called Europeans, were allowed to buy it in the fee simple paper title, and that's how we could buy and sell land. I'm thinking European has got to do with land, and I'm even thinking native or Maori has got to do with land. And so when they became a European, they were allowed to buy and sell their own land in its paper title as they pleased. And then but here's what it says next, that their status as the native or the Maori or the wife or husband or the child or any other issue, whether born before or after a native so declared herself to be a European, shall continue to be unaffected by the change of status last mentioned, native, unless the wife or husband or child makes their own declaration. See, I'm just annoyed that everyone's abusing my lovely, beautiful ancestors, that they freaking worked their bloody, I can't say their butts off because that would be nice. They worked themselves to death to try and protect the natives. I would say, at the end of the day, looking at what they did, there was nothing more they could do. They were exemplary in what they attempted to do to save the natives and save their lands for them. At the end of the day, you can't control your husband that's going down the gambling den every day. You simply can't. He comes home, he lies, he says, I didn't spend money, when he really stole $50,000 out of the checking account. You don't find it out until 3 years later when you get a bill. He hides the bills from you. 3 years later, you get this huge bill and you're going to be going to prison because of what your husband did, because it was in your name. This is what was going on. You can only do so much to protect people. And then there's a point, it's even with your kids. Your kids are out using drugs and you're trying to stop them. They lie to you, they cheat you, they take your money, they spend the money, there comes a time when you just cannot protect people any more than what you're doing. And going by this, everyone was very well protected as best that they could do it. And there's no thanks to us, is there? All you Kupe freaks, Kupe lying freaks. There's no thanks to us. They're calling us the Pākehā thieves, the lands. You're fucking liars, aren't you? You're all fucking liars. So my lovely ancestors said you could take your European status, sell your land, but you had to be educated. You had to have another means of making money so that even if you lost your land, you would still have finances to take care of yourself and your family. Your children did not lose their native status. Only you did. And so some people wanted to do that, and who are we to stop them? Every person declared to be a European shall, notwithstanding the change of status, be entitled to succeed to the native land and property of every kind, as if he had continued to be a native or Maori, and as if his status had not been changed, and all right of succession shall accordingly continue in and thereafter may accrue to him and may be derived through him, as if he had continued to be a native or a Maori. So native or a Maori. So there's two classes here. One's a native, one's a Maori, and one's a European. And then we were British or German or whatever we were on top of that. So there's many words here that we're not comprehending as a people. We simply aren't, and we have to investigate. And so all it meant was he's still entitled to inherit, he's still entitled to all his privileges, except that his particular piece of land, he's entitled to sell it as any European will sell their paper title. And so that was the essence of this. Now you're thinking, why is Kate Floss raving on about that? So what we had to do was go back to Rangi Kirihoma. Rangi Kirihoma was the first person in the history of New Zealand to be declared a European. and there's a court battle about it. So it's just going to be a long video. You just have to put up with it. So he was the first person. Now, as I have told you, that his land was the Maunga Waka Kupe. Is he Kupe? His court case of Kupe I'll just put that out. Oh, no, don't want you to see that yet. His court case in 1890, when he was 2 years old, was called Ngā Waka a Kupe, and it was actually one word. Can you see that there? So it was one word, but on these sites, they've changed it to be Ngā Waka o Kupe, and not, so they've changed the O, they've changed the A for an O, and they've separated into 3 words rather than, now, looking at the New Zealand Maori language, because I'm in Thailand, and in Thailand they do actually join all of their vocabulary together. But looking at the New Zealand Maori language, it's very similar to English language in that our words are separated. And whenever we put the words together, they are considered to be a compound word. And a compound word usually has a different meaning to the singular, the core word, the key word from Latin. And it's looking to me here that this looks like a compound word of which they've separated it into 3 different words and changed the A for an O. So this looks to me to be the name of a place called Ngā Waka a Kupe. And it might not have been Ngā Waka a Kupe, it might have just been Ngā Waka Kupe. Ngā Waka Kupe, with a long A sound. Might have just been a long A sound, which they put the double A to increase the sound. But it looks to me like a compound word. And we know that Te Koti's got something to do with this. There are many land blocks, but it's like 62,700 acres, acres. And I think there's a lot more. It's like the second, third, I think they're all different. And it's perhaps all of these places that are all called kupes, something to do with Ahikaroa. Now why am I talking that? Sidetrack, come back. So anyway, Rangi, who was 2 years old at the time of this court document and was receiving his inheritance of Ngā Waka Kupe, he was receiving his inheritance. You can see here, the O is over here on the left. It's actually one word. It's a compound word. And it is clearly talking about a place that was given that name. And so they've just, all that the conspiracy and the common law people have done is taken that word and they have divided it up and then used this word Kupe as the name of a chief, which never was, in my opinion. So now where am I going to with this? Let's go to the court case. Oh dear. So here's the court case that were many, I'll go to Rangi first. Right, you can see here Rangi that he got married in 1910. So I'm just going to tell you a little about this. He was 20 years old when he got married in 1910. There's the ever-present preacher, I think, standing there manipulating everything. I believe that the church has got a lot to do with this. And so there is Rangi sitting here, and he was 20 years old when this marriage occurred. And he doesn't look very happy either, by the way. And the court case that I just showed you about in 1890, he was 2 years old, all right? He was 2 years old in 1890, and then he got married when he was 20. And this court case here, and he was the first person, oh, I'm in the wrong place. Right, I can turn that off. Right, we're going to go to court documents now. Don't ask me where I find all this stuff. Oh my gosh. Right, there's 2 court documents. So let's just put that down there. I'm not sure about the dates on these court documents. So he got married in 1910. He got the property when he was 2 years old in 1890. And then in 1910, he got married. And then on the 26th of April, there was a court case. Now I'm going to read most of this to you. It's called the Rangi Kirihoma Commission. And it seems that people have been trying to get this land just for so long. And it's an extremely sad story. In obedience to the commission issued under the commission of the inquiry, there was a commission of inquiry 1908 on the dated December 1917, the year before, directing me to inquire and report into the circumstances connected with the declaring of one Rangi Kirihoma to be a European, particularly as to whether the public trustee, servant or agent was concerned in the application of the said Rangi to be declared a European, and further as to whether the public trustee or officer was connected with the disposal of or dealings with any portion of the estate of Rangi, either before or after he was declared to be a European, and if so, was the public trustee officer guilty of neglect or dereliction of duty with regard to the said Rangi. And I have the honour to state that I have held such an inquiry, and now I'm going to give you the report as follows. So there are 2 issues here. One is the issue is that Rangi declared himself a European, and the minute that he did that, he was allowed to sell his land as a European. The second issue is if the person involved with that was working on the trust, that the trust from 1890, if this man was working on that trust and had been working with Rangi for all of these years, since he was 2 years old, in fact, until he was 25 years old, this was apparent, 25 years old or a bit later, I think. I opened the commission, appeared with instructor to formulate certain charge. So John Findlay appeared. There's a Findlay in there. So the complaint was against Mr. Chennels, and that this is what the various officers were complaining, is that William Boyce Chennels, while the agent of the public trust at Masterton, was guilty of neglect or dereliction of duty with regard to Rangi, to whom the said William Chennels was in a fiduciary relationship as such, an agent as insomuch as. So this is William Boyce Chennels. He induced, this is what they accuse him of, he induced Rangi to lease and sell certain lands known respectively as Ngawaka Kupe. And these were the blocks, I think. Number 4, Mangahuia, Ngawaka Kupe. Number 2B, Table Lands. And this is again where I'm saying to you that Kupe is not actually a person. I'm saying that it is actually Canoe Cape. and that it was a compound word, and the name of the cape was called Canoe Cape. That is the name of it. And then people have come along and separated these words and given the word cape to apply to a person called Kupe, which in my opinion is false. To the members of the family, the boy channels at a gross he sold it. They got Rangi to sell it to channels at a gross undervalue, something like they're doing today, and upon disadvantageous terms, and they procured such lease and sale without seeing that Rangi was separately and competently advised. So Channels was Rangi's trust protector. And then he, instead of getting a separate person to take care of the transaction, he got Rangi to transact directly with him, and they're saying that is illegal. William Boyd, in order to procure and facilitate such a sale, as aforesaid, he induced or assisted in inducing Rangi to be Europeanized, well knowing that the said Rangi was not fit or competent to manage his own affairs. And then William Boyce induced Rangi to execute in favour of William Boyce a power of attorney containing a provision for the remuneration of the said channels upon an extravagant basis, which remuneration the said William Channels subsequently deducted from monies of the said Rangi passing through his hands. So basically, oh my gosh, what this Channels did. Basically, what Channels did was got Rangi to declare himself. Well, first of all, Channels was the trust protector of Rangi for many, many, many years. And then upon the reaching of Rangi's coming of age, 20 years old, Channels took him to the court and got him to declare himself a European. And after he went to the court and got himself to declare himself a European, he then got Rangi to sign him to be the power of attorney. When he got him to, Channels left the trust, got him to sign him as the power of attorney, and then he bought lands from Rangi, and the transactions of buying the lands, since he was the power of attorney, he got Rangi to also pay him a salary to make the transaction of buying the lands, and he charged exorbitant fees for that. Rangi was being ripped off every which way he turned. Kind of what the Adern's doing to us in New Zealand today. William Channels, notwithstanding that he also had the power of attorney to collect the rents, arranged that the public trustee should collect the rents of the said Rangi Kirihoma's lands, with the result that the said Rangi Kirihoma was charged double commission for the So on top of all of that, Rangi still had to pay the trust to manage his lands, and then through there, the trust paid the lawyer who was buying the lands and collecting the rents. And I mean, it's just heinous what they did to poor old Rangi. So clearly, this is a clear example of why the natives had to have their lands taken away from them and put into trust, because they really were not able to enter any of these transactions and protect themselves. The complaint was, I propose to give a short and concise history of Kirihoma's connection to the public trust. So this is about Rangi. The public trust was on the 9th day of December 1890, appointed under the Maori Estate Management Act. The trustee for Rangi, then a minor of about 2 years of age, so went into the Maori Estate, which I know about that from Sydney, Taifunga, that they did have a Maori Estate and all their lands were in there. Whenever a parent died, then the Maori Estate would manage all of the activities, and then they were the trustee for Rangi, and then, but they also had to, so there were like a lot of blockers here. He was the child, and the Maori estate managed all of his lands, but they weren't allowed to sell or do anything with it. But the actual administering of all the money went to the public trustee during his minority. So there was a double checker here for him while he was a child. And this is what they're doing to our New Zealand children now. They're finding out their names, they're tracing them, they're tracing their trusts, and they're following them since they're born to the time that they come of age. They're making friends with them, they're marrying into them, and then when they become of age, they're tricking them. And this is a clear example here of what these nasty missionaries are up to. Just like, well, I won't say the church that's in New Zealand, but everybody knows the one that I keep talking about. So he was entitled to large areas of land which were administered by the public trustee, and they became very valuable. When he became of age in 1909, there were then accumulated funds to his credit amounting to £36,000, which is £36,000 back then would be equivalent probably to maybe even a couple of $1 million today. So he was very wealthy. Besides the valuable landed estate, so he had that money on top of his land. During the whole period of Rangi's minority, William Chennels was the agent of the public trust. This guy had planned it for 2 decades, and as such received the rents from the Mongahuia block. Now, this Kupe lands involved many different capes, and each of them were a different block. And so each of them were called capes or canoe capes, and which that's why I'm saying it encompassed a great area. And then each cape had its own name to the way that I comprehend it, which was a valuable portion of Rangi's estate. Chennels was the land agent. Also, as Rangi grew to manhood, he proved to be, here's what it says about him. He proved to be very irregular in his habits, and it seemed to be quite apparent that he was not fit to manage his own affairs, especially where he had to administer a large and valuable estate and to have the control of so much of a large sum of money. The then native minister, Sir James Carroll, who was very famous, who was also minister in charge of the public trust office, and the then public trustee, Mr. Poynton, seemed to be satisfied as to this. And what they did is they induced Rangi to execute a deed of trust settling a sum of £25,000 upon the public trustee in trust to pay the income thereof to himself for all of his life, and after his death according to his profession. So they asked him to make a trust for himself where he had £25,000, which is a lot of money, that he could dip into as he pleased to use for money for all of his life for anything that he wanted to do. And the rest would be set aside for his heirs and successors. And this they calculated to be enough for him. And he was free to use that money as he pleased. But the only thing is that he had to apply to them and let them know that he wanted X amount of money and what he wanted it for. And just they made sure that people weren't cheating him. Now, I do this for my husband who's got a mental health injury, and my husband owns lands and houses, and he just gives it away. And I'm in full control of all his money, but it doesn't mean I get to spend it. And then I give my husband a certain amount each week, and I keep a check on, and if he wants some money, he wants to buy something, he can say to me, I want to buy this, and I will ask him why, and then I will give him the money to buy it. So the money belongs to them, but we just keep a check on it for them. The residue in the cash in hand was paid to Rangi through Chennels, as the agent for the Public Trust Office, and the former forthwith commenced to spend money lavishly. He even tried to secure a loan through the office of a further £3,000, but the office was very wisely demurred to this, and the loan was not granted. So he's trying for years to get his hands on all of Rangi's money. In January 1910, shortly before he got married, now he got married in 1910. When did he get married? He got married on the 4th of January in 1910. I bet Mr. Chennels is sitting right here. Wonder if that's Mr. Chennels right there. And he came of age, he came of age in January of 1910, and apparently he got married on the 4th of January of 1910. I bet that's Mr. Chennels sitting there. And in January, shortly after he came of age, he gave to Mr. So a series of things occurred here. Upon coming of age, he got married. In the same month, he also declared himself a European, and at the same time, he also gave his power of attorney to Mr. Chennels, authorising him to collect rents and make payments. And he also made payments, notice of the revocation of this power of attorney. And the notice of the revocation of the power of attorney was in 1915, in April. 1915, in April, a group of people clued on to what was going on, and I'm assuming it's the people that filed this case here. This case here was in 1918, and all of these people made a case against Mr. Chennels. And so I'm assuming that in 1915, the trust had clicked on to everything that so 5 years later, they clicked on, they removed him as power of attorney, and then they investigated the whole affair, and then they sent it through to the court. Now, there is another couple of things here before we finish off. I know they're long videos, but they just are. Now, the government website has said that this information of the Royal Commission by W. Bishop occurred on the 23rd of March 1918. But I don't see how that can be, so that's why I say don't trust every website. I don't see how that can be, because this case here was in April 1918. And I'll come back to this case in a minute. So, because I didn't finish reading this, there might be some more that we need to know. In March 1914, it was decided to abolish the agency at Masterton, and presumably thereafter, Chennels ceased to act in any way for the Public Trust Office. So the Public Trust Office was closed down in 1914, and then because Chennels ceased to be a member of the Public Trust, and I assume that this is, so he had to stop being the power of attorney. I assume this is where they discovered all of his discrepancies. On the 12th of April 1913, Rangi was Europeanised. He was Europeanised in 1913 under the Native Land Act, and the effect of this being that all of his lands were released from restriction, and became capable of being disposed of as freely European land. And he states that he was advised to do this by Chennels, who told him that he would obtain certain privileges. Chennels gave him the papers to sign, and the necessary recommendation was made by a Judge Gilfeder on these terms. This is what the judge said. In the Native Land Court of New Zealand, in the matter of Section 17, 1912, and in the matter of an application of Rangi, at the sitting of the Native Land Court held at Wellington on the 19th day of February 1930, the merits of the above application were inquired to. And he says, I am satisfied that the applicant Rangi, who is a native man 25 years of age, has a competent knowledge of the English language and is possessed of educational qualifications at least equal to the fourth standard as prescribed by the Education Act. He is possessed of real and personal property worth at least £60,000. This guy was like off the charts wealthy. Of this, there is in the hands of the public trust £25,000. So the rest of it must have been kept at the Maori Land Court. The applicant being entitled during his lifetime to the income arising therefrom. So all interest from his $25,000, he could use that. But the other must have been $45,000 was kept from him, which he could have later applied for if he needed it. But they did it. They gave him more than enough that he would need for his lifetime. And so the judge recommended the order. This was on, the 10th day of March, 1910. When did he get married? Look, he got married on the 4th of January, 1910. And then he claimed his European status on the 10th of March, 1910, all guided by Channel. And then the trust closed down in 1914. Says he was Europeanized in 1913, but actually it says here 1910. I'm not trusting some of the dates because the amendment to the Native Land Act was 1912. So I'm not really understanding all these dates. It would take a bit of research, but I'm not going to go there. But anyway, this is the general outline of what all occurred to Rangi. Very shortly after this, Channels and a solicitor named Beard, who had conducted the proceedings in the Native Land Court, at which so remember this Beard because he's important, the Europeanization recommended was obtained, appear to have taken steps to obtain an interest in the land owned by Rangi, and each of them did obtain it in the names of certain members of their respective families. With the details of these transactions, this commission is concerned. Certain proceedings have been taken in the courts arising out of these dealings, and some restitution has been made and a settlement arrived at. So some of it was fixed and they've given him back. I don't think he would have got back all that was taken. There's not the slightest doubt that the Channels used his position as an agent for the public trust and was enabled by such position to further his designs on Rangi's property. And it was because of this, of his connection and standing with the office, that he was finally enabled to carry out what can only be described as, the judge says, and I agree, the judge says, look at it how you want to, but it looks like a very gross fraud. As, however, has been pointed out by counsel, I am not empowered, this is what he says, I'm not empowered to try Channels on any criminal charge. And beyond stating, so this was a declaration court hearing, beyond stating the fact in connection with his position as agent for the public trust office, I have nothing further to do with him. So far as the declaring of Rangi to be a European, so he's saying, this judge is saying, I've got nothing more to do with all of that. This is just all the background as to how it came to be that Rangi was declared the first person to ever declare themselves a European in the country of New Zealand. And ultimately, I think this is what the case is about as I read it to you. I think, might find something else, but I think. He says, I have absolutely no doubt whatever that Rangi should never have been Europeanised. It was the first application of the kind to come before the native land court, and the seriousness of the step does not appear to have been fully appreciated by the court, which seems to have been impressed very largely by the solicitor, Mr. Beard, who is the one that bought up all the lands in his family's name. So he didn't buy it, but he had organised for his family to buy it, who appeared in support of the application and who was himself a subsequent party to the fraudulent dealings with the Kerehoma's land. Kerehoma himself admits that he should not have been Europeanised and that he did not understand the effect of the order. The court was misled throughout the proceedings, and the true fact of the position deliberately concealed. So the judge apparently never talked to Rangi. A very few minutes' conversation with Kerehoma would have convinced the court beyond any shadow of a doubt that Kerehoma's case was not one in which such an extraordinary power should ever have been exercised. And it is in passing strange to me that, with the knowledge that was generally possessed of Kerehoma's habits and qualities, the application was not blocked by the officials of the native office, as could undoubtedly have been done. So I'm just going to try and come on and explain all that, what happened. So the judge says that clearly, simply from the fact that his £60,000 was taken away from him, and he was allocated £25,000 for his lifetime living expenses, because of his way of life and because he was so easily manipulated and easily gotten out of his monies. For his own safety, they took his money away from him. And all the sharks were just hanging around him. It's just, if you can just imagine, sometimes I go there in my mind and I'm really there with them. I said, you can just imagine he had all these people encircling him, giving him gifts, making friends with him, sneaky people in his ear. One person that he had the trust in this ear, and he had that channel in his other ear. Then he had Beard in his other ear. They were dragging him around from pillar to post, taking him to the courts. This is what they're doing to the native Aboriginals and the native elderly Maori as I speak to you today. This is exactly what's going on. It's awful. And the person becomes extremely stressed. They don't know who to trust. They don't know who to turn to. They look this way, and this guy's my friend, and I know he's cheating me. And I look this way, and this guy's my friend, and I know he's cheating me. It's just going on. And they become depressed and despondent to the point where they'll do anything to resolve the situation, and even leave themselves to be destitute in the streets just to get out of this, people all hounding them for their money and hounding them for their lands. It's just evil, evil shit. Yeah, I've had my rant. So, but then the judge is saying, but hey, Rangi had two trusts. He had the Native Land Court Trust, which was supposed to be taking care of him. And then on top of that, he had the trust that was caring for his money. So they had a double blocker. And anything that the European trust wanted to do had to first go through the Native Maori Land Court first. And the judge is saying, how come they didn't block it? were they in cahoots? I'm saying sometimes the judges can't say things if they don't have evidence of it, but I'm noticing that they put little things in there to let you know that, hey, this is what I think, and I'm pretty sure, but I don't have any evidence of it, so I'm just going to put it there for you to use your own mind. My mind's telling me that someone down at the Native Land Courts was working together with Chendal and Beard, and they had been tracking, and this is what they're doing today. Whenever a native Maori is born into a trust, they are followed from the day that they're born. And they just wait until they get one of them that's a drug addict, a drunkard, a destitute person, and then they rip them off every which way that they can. And they're doing it to New Zealand now since 1975 in Manuka Hanari. All right, better stop, keep going. All right, I'm on the last bit. Well, no, I'm not. You just have to freaking watch the video. It's long. I most sincerely hope. So he said, why didn't the Native Land Court help? I most sincerely hope. I'll make this a bit smaller. Don't need to be that big. I most sincerely hope that this scandalous case will have the effect of inducing the repeal. He wanted it repealed of the highly dangerous provision contained in Section 17 of the Amendment Act. Once this order is made, there is no power of revocation, and very serious mischief and wrong may result. I strongly recommend that the government take this matter into serious consideration. It is quite clear to me that no one connected with the Public Trust Office outside channels was aware in any way or party to the Europeanisation of Kerehoma. I am also able to say with certainty that no one connected with the Public Trust Office outside of Channel was connected with the disposal of or had any dealings with the estate of Rangi, nor can I find that any such officer was guilty of any neglect or dereliction of duty with regard to him. Towards the close of the inquiry, I received a telegram from Mr. Hornsby. Mr. Hornsby complained. He said to the following, I regret with no other course open to me but to retire from the commission and request my counsel through you do the same. Was promised a full inquiry but blocked by the council. The judge said, as I have previously stated to Mr. Morrison, had filed before the commission to open these proceedings, the charges that are embodied in this report that were made by Mr. Hornsby. I cannot imagine why Mr. Hornsby makes the assertion that he was promised a full inquiry but was blocked by counsel. Every title of evidence that was brought forward by Mr. Morrison on behalf of Mr. Hornsby, I did admit into the case. I have set out the result in this report. If the statement in the effect that Mr. Hornsby was promised a full inquiry refers to the government, I naturally have nothing to do with it. And most certainly, any objection to the scope of the commission should have been taken at the commencement of the inquiry and not left to the very end. A fair point. I take it that my clear duty is to report to your excellency on my finding. This is the Privy Council, I suppose. Even although Mr. Hornsby at the last moment withdraws from participation, I have to honour to submit herewith the notes of evidence taken by me. So basically, it is kind of sad, and I think that Hornsby didn't get the outcome what he wanted. What Hornsby wanted the judge to do, in my opinion, in my non-legal opinion, is that he wanted the judge to rule on the fraudulent activities of Channel, and he wanted him to rule on all of the lands that had been given to Channel's and Beard's family and all of that. And the judge sidestepped it, basically. The judge sidestepped it all and focused on the Europeanization of Rangi. And the judge basically said he basically said the Europeanization of Rangi was irrevocable. It can't be revoked, one, which means that all the land sales were correct. And two, he asked for the 1912 Section 17 to be readdressed and repealed. And then he left it at that. And when Hornsby realised that the judge wasn't going to give a ruling, I suppose that he felt like he got bamboozled again. They kind of won the case, but they gained nothing. What's that saying? Win the battle but lose the war. They won the battle. Yes, the judge agreed that he shouldn't have been Europeanised, and if he was never Europeanised, then none of the activities would have happened. But the law as it stood was that he was a European and he was allowed to sell his land, and those people cheated him and bought up the land. And so the judge basically said, the government thing, the trust thing, the fraudulent thing, that's a whole nother case. And you've got to go and refight all of that. And it's just a sad story how you can't blame the judges. The judges are just following the law, but, clearly a very bad thing will happen here. Let's better move on. I get upset doing these videos sometimes. Then I get a bit off track. I do get upset. It does hurt me. It does hurt me to know. And then you see the soundness of the judgments, but you're still saying, but hey, it's not fair. But you see why they made the judgment that they did. Well, there was actually another court case later to that. But I'm not understanding the dates, because this court case, according to them, was done later. Now, let's go back to Rangi. Oh, where is Rangi? Over here, a very sad thing happened. Now, this court case apparently happened. Is that the end of it? Oh, I didn't read the end of it. No, my silly home. Oh, the repeal, yeah. This court case occurred on February of 1918. And here's Rangi apparently went off to war, and apparently he died. Here he is here, and apparently he died in November of 1918. It is just very sad, It just does so upset me, because all the while that this case was going on, he was at the war fighting. I need a tissue. And while he was there at the war fighting, he probably wasn't even at the court. So he died in 1918 in November, and this court case was in February of 1918. So they sent him off to war. They reckon he died of influenza, but who freaking knows? Just sad, And so I assume that, and so then there was another court case, and they're reckoning that this court case was the 23rd of March, but I just don't see how it can be, because this case here about him being Europeanised was in February of 1918, that it says it right there, that you can see, and then you can see his gravestone, and he died on the 13th of 1918, that everyone can see that, right? It's just it's so upsetting for me, I'm sorry. Just really hurts me to how to control myself. And so this court case here, there was another royal commission set by H.W. Bishop. Is that the same guy? Yeah, this was H.W. Bishop. And he set up another royal commission. And this appointed to inquire into certain matters. Okay, so then they went and prosecuted the judge who had been appointed to inquire about this. And then Mr. Skerritt contended that under the Act, I've got my control back now, under the Act, the governor had no power to appoint a commission to inquire into such a matter as the Europeanising of a Maori. And they said he only had power to appoint a commission to inquire into the conduct of the public officer. But he contended that in his connection with Rangi, after the latter came of age, Chennels was not acting as an officer of the public trust, but in his private capacity as Rangi's banker and agent. So they had sent the case to court against the trust and the government. But at the time that all this occurred, Chennels was now a private citizen. And so the judge felt that he couldn't make a judgment on the trust, but what he could make a judgment was the Europeanisation. And Mr. Skerritt is saying that that's not what this case was about. So he had power to appoint a commission to inquire into the conduct of a public officer, but he contended that in his connection with Rangi, after the latter came of age, Chennel was not acting as a public officer, but in his private capacity as Rangi's banker and agent. Sir John Findlay said that certain suspicions had been raised as to the connection of the Public Trust Office with what Chennels did in connection with Rangi, and he had a right to hear what was to be said on the subject before putting Mr. Fitchett or Mr. Ronaldson in the witness box. I don't know who they are, Dr. Fitchett. The commissioner said he was greatly with Mr. Skerritt on the points he had raised. He had foreseen them when the matter of a commission was first mentioned to him, but he was not prepared to give a decision at that stage. So they thought there was going to be problems, but they kind of ignored it. Mr. Skerritt again urged that the matter in dispute was solely one between Beard and the native and Chennels and the native. He suggested that the only thing to investigate was the connection of the Public Trust Office at Masterton had with those transactions. The commissioner remarked that the native had been Europeanised by a court of competent jurisdiction, and he wondered what would be the effect of any report he might possibly make. Mr. Morrison remarked that Chennels remained an officer of the Trust Office for years after Rangi came of age and was a servant of the office while he gained possession of Rangi's land. That being so, he contended that Chennels' actions came distinctly within the scope of the commission. So then became the battle of who, this was all to do with the Maunga Waka Kupe blocks, several of them. He's a very rich man, Rangi. And the argument came that the Commission never made any rulings or any comments about the trust, but only focused on the Europeanisation of Rangi, of which they had no power over anyway, because once Europeanised, it could not be revoked. Because part of being Europeanised were that you were supposed to have an assessment by the Native Land Court, and the Native Land Court should have blocked it, and they didn't. And the Native Land Court well understood about the Europeanisation of New Zealand Maoris, and they didn't block it. So poor Rangi was knocked around from all sides. And the people that were supporting Rangi felt that the Commission avoided what their duty was. And this is where I'm left up in arms, because I don't know where the case ended. But this greatest, saddest thing about it all is that we do know, I better not look at it because I'll start crying again. What we do know is that while all of this was going on, poor Rangi, a lovely man, was off fighting the war for foreign countries. And he passed away within a few short years of, I don't know when he went, I bet there'll be army records about him. But now I want to bring you to the present day of, so I'll turn all this off. Get it out. There is more skullduggery going on with Rangi's land. And there's skullduggery going on to this day. We know that Kahuria Rao and several other groups have set themselves up and called themselves descendants of Kupe, and they're saying that Kupe came from the Pacific Islands, the Ariki lines or the chiefly lines of the Pacific Islands, and they're saying that New Zealand was called Aotearoa. Now, we still got to get on this story, Aotearoa, but it is all involved, the whole Aotearoa Kupe thing, in my still ongoing conspiracy theory, is all about Rangi Kirihoma and the canoe capes, several blocks of land that he owned, his children owned, and there are various sneaky people that are trying to get hold of New Zealand, and many of them are not actually even New Zealand people. Many of them come from the islands. Now, there is a dispute going on there's actually, I just want to say one thing. I'm going to take 5 minutes for this, and then I'm going to finish. It is interesting to me that in 2012, I'm saying that the New Zealand government, in my conspiracy theory, these sneaky people create laws, they look ahead to something that they want to do, and that they see that there's no law for them to do that, so they create a law, and then they wait for a few years, and then they go and do the thing that it is that they want to do because there's no law blocking them anymore. And this is where my conspiracy theories is, this is the new rabbit hole that I'm going down. It's a new one. Now, it's interesting to me that in 1912, they created an amendment to the, now he was born, Rangi, in 1890, Rangi was 2 years old, and he owned thousands of acres of land, and his parents must have died, and all that land belonged to him. And he 1890, in 1912, which is 12 years late, 10, 10, 20, 19, 1890, 1900, 1912. In 1912, so 22 years later, is that? Yeah. 22 years later, when Rangi would have been 24 years old around, they created the law that, oh no, the dates aren't working out. 1890, he was 2. 1912, the dates aren't working out, are they? 1912, look at a bit of paper. So it would have been 1890, they reckon, that he was 2 years old. And that was that court case. And then 1912 was the Section 17 was added. So that would have been made him 22 years old. And then, they tracked him. They tracked him from when he was 2 years old. They changed the law. This is why they're talking about the government, you see. They inserted a law in 1912 to say that a New Zealand native could Europeanise themselves. I think they wrote this law just for him. And then in around he got married in 1910, and around 1913, he became the first New Zealand Maori to Europeanise himself. They took all of his lands, and then, when did he die? Go back to you. 1918, he died. So between 1913 and 1915, they took all of his lands and all of his money, which they'd been siphoning off him for years. And then in 1918, then they spent 3 years figuring it all out and tracing it all, doing like Kate Floss does now. And then in 1918, they took it to the court. And I'm saying they wrote the law specifically for him in my conspiracy theory. And then, the heinous, what's going on? And then in 1918, then they sent him to war where he died. So I think they specifically wrote. Now, present day, there are still people fighting over this land, and this was a fight between a person called Rangi Kirihoma, which must be a descendant of Rangi, and a dispute between Matthew Howe and Tamari Gardiner in person. And look here, this is actually an address called 365 Aotea MB174. And I'm thinking that it's got something to do with this court case here. You're probably going to find it somewhere in here, these lands. It does mention Aotea in here. And I'm saying that the word Kupe comes from the Ngā Waka Kupe, many blocks of land, and it was a compound word that referred to all of these lands that all belonged to Rangi. Rangi was freaking wealthy, man. Very sad story. And then this is called the Aotea district. And all they've done is added roa onto there, and then they've separated the word to be a singular words to be Kupe, and then they're calling Kupe and then they took Percy Smith's, they took Percy Smith's story from his fantasy book of, I can't remember the name of that book, but it's something to do with stories of the Pacific Islands and New Zealand. And they took his story and they took this word, Aotea, and then they took this word from the Waka Kupe, various blocks of land, and they've created this whole story that Kupe comes from the Ariki of the Pacific Islands. This case is not over yet. Kate Floss is still on to this because I've got some stories about that Aotea and how that came to be, and the word Hawaii, Waiki, we ain't finished yet. That's all I'm going to finish today, but here they're still fighting over that land. And the people involved in this are Manu Kirihoma. Manu Kirihoma, if you see me and you see my video, that I just make the deepest apologies for any discrepancies in the history that I've tried to tell today. I'm just an amateur and I don't really understand everything that I read, and sometimes I don't know where it comes from, but I do feel that Rangi's been with me today, leading me all through this, and we really need this story to be told. And so my apologies to the family, or the Kirihoma family. There's no ill intention on my part towards you, and so if you see my video and you see any discrepancies, you don't need to come back to me and say Kate Floss is bullshit or any of that. I'm just was going through and I found this information and put together a bit of a story because I'm trying to find out about this fake word Kupe, this fake person Kupe, and this fake word Aotearoa. I don't know if I'm not saying anybody's involved, but I'm just saying that there has been deception around this family for 200 years, for a very, very, very long time. And the deception is continuing to this day. And I just want to say to all the people, all the Maori peons, I just would like you to all pay homage to Rangi. Where's the picture there? I would like you to all pay homage to him. Oh, dear. I don't want you to do that. I just would like you to pay homage to Rangi here, that you can see his picture here. And just take a minute to think about the hellish, I want everybody in New Zealand to think about this stories from Kate Floss in New Zealand, to think about that we had this very vulnerable person called Rangi, and we had these three sneaky people and someone hidden down at the Native Land Court, or maybe 2 or 3 people at the Native Land Court that had been tracking him since he was 2 years old. And then we had these 3 sneaky people that were put into the business of taking care of him, and they got together and did all these horrible things. But rather than abusing the lovely Anglo people, native Anglo people of New Zealand, please remember all the lovely Anglo people that stood up and fought very hard for Rangi to save him, his lands, and his family's lands. They fought hard, but they lost. I don't know if they carried on fighting. So as we get these few Anglo people and these few Maori people that are up to all of this skullduggery and this sneakiness, we have these many Anglo people and these many native Maoris that we are all working together to stop it. So please, everybody, be aware that there are a good people and a bad people, and we always should remember how difficult it has been for the native Maoris. Why? just simply because they owned land and they had some money, and it ruined their lives through these few people. And so let's all just remember that. Don't go hating on the lovely Anglo people that have fought very hard, as I fight very hard for all New Zealand people. That's all I've got to say on there. Finish with this one. God save the Queen.